Hello, I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome to this week's World Have Your Say. And the most talked about story in the world looks like it will be developing during our hour on air. In the next few minutes, Dominique Strauss-Kahn is expected to leave his apartment. In fact, we've just been told he has left his apartment. Let's have a look at pictures of him doing that. And then we're going to see him arrive live at a Manhattan court. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there, though there are some reports that his bail conditions may be relaxed. We'll have to see about that. What we do know is that this story is centre stage because of a New York Times report which quotes anonymous sources within the prosecution saying that there are concerns about the alleged victim's reliability. We'll bring you the latest and tap into your discussions around the case. And wherever you are in the world, you're very welcome to take part. Well, before we speak to guests in France, America and elsewhere, let's bring ourselves up to date on our lead story and the other major news of the day. Dominique Strauss-Kahn's in a New York court where he's accused of attempted rape. His lawyers are arguing for his stringent bail conditions to be relaxed, and there are some reports that this will be granted. Meanwhile, the New York Times is claiming that prosecutors have raised questions about the credibility of the maid making the accusations. It's the 90th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, and President Hu Jintao has warned its members that they must fight corruption to retain the support and trust of the people. Huge crowds of protesters are again taking to the streets in Syria to demand that President Assad resigns. This video apparently shows a large protest in the Al-Qadam neighborhood in Damascus, but the BBC cannot verify this. A number of people are reported to have been killed today. Lebanon's interior minister has confirmed the names of 4 Hezbollah members charged with the murder of the country's former Prime Minister Rafi Hariri. The arrest warrants were issued by a UN-backed tribunal which is investigating the murder. And the Venezuelan army chief has dismissed concerns about President Hugo Chávez's absence from the country, saying that the president is still running Venezuela and that there's no threat to its constitutional order. Earlier, Mr. Chávez admitted having cancer surgery in Cuba. Well, let's go live to New York and speak to the BBC's Caroline Hepker, who's at the courtroom where Dominique Strauss-Kahn is appearing. Caroline, what can you tell us?
Well, Dominique Strauss-Kahn and his lawyers have arrived at the courthouse here in Lower Manhattan. Essentially, they're going to be arguing to have his bail conditions, strict bail conditions, $1 million in bail money, and as well as house arrest relaxed because of these revelations by 2 well-placed law enforcement officers to media sources here in New York that the woman who accused Dominique Strauss-Kahn of serious sexual assault may have lied about the circumstances of that alleged assault, and that she may in fact be involved with criminals, with in particular a drug runner, and that she may have even had a telephone conversation discussing the benefits of accusing Mr. Strauss-Kahn of sexual assault. Her lawyers, although they did not answer those New York Times allegations, did say that notwithstanding the allegations of serious sexual assault against Mr. Strauss-Kahn are true and still stand.
And how long will this take, Caroline?
Well, Mr. Strauss-Kahn is going to be in court for the next few minutes. It shouldn't take all that long for the judge to decide. And in fact, we had reports out in the last few hours that prosecutors had in fact probably already agreed to relax the bail conditions for Mr. Strauss-Kahn. But really it is an incredible turn of events, a completely dramatic change compared to just a few weeks ago when the district attorney was talking about a very strong and solid case against Mr. Strauss-Kahn, of course, the leader of the International Monetary Fund, a key player in the world of international finance. He was then hauled off a flight from JFK Airport here in New York and arrested here in New York. And so now we have a very, very different scene where Mr. Strauss-Kahn could well be free on his own recognizance with no bail ahead of a possible trial.
Caroline, thanks for the moment. Lots of you watching this are reacting on Twitter as you watch. You can either use the hashtag DSK or WHYS. We'll pick up all of the messages that you post on Twitter. There he is leaving the apartment where he's been living for the past few weeks. It's estimated staying in that apartment is costing him in the region of $250,000, though it's not possible to confirm those figures. That's him getting in a car, travelling to the Manhattan courtroom where he is now appearing, and those proceedings are underway, considering whether to allow a relaxation of the bail conditions, which currently mean that he's not able to leave that flat. Let's, as soon as we find out what's happened, of course, from the New York courtroom, we'll tell you about it here on BBC World News. In the meantime, let's bring in a couple of people to get reaction to this, starting with Gilles Klein, a French media journalist. He works for arrêtsurimage.net. Gilles, thanks for joining us. Your reaction to today's developments?
The angels comes back, you know. For the French people, it seems his reputation is not tarnished forever. And everybody is wondering, will he run again in the presidential race against his worst enemy, Sarkozy? That's the main point. But since this morning, 5 a.m., all the French news channels like Sky News are live, you know. Whatever, they have nothing to say because we have to wait what's going on.
But aren't you jumping the gun here? He remains charged with 7 very serious offences.
Yes, but you know, I don't think the people now trust the lady which accuse him. You know, they think it's a setup, or they paid for it, or whatever. You know. So my feeling is that strange that he has been very badly injured in his reputation, with the French feminist walking in the street. And many ladies saying, yes, I am a French journalist and he has been rude with me. And now it's reversed, totally reversed. And naturally, in the Socialist Party, everybody is running to support him because if he comes back, he is an heavy one, you know.
Fascinating, Gilles. And as you're talking, we can see live pictures there of the Manhattan courtroom. Inside is Dominique Strauss-Kahn, finding out if his bail conditions will be eased. And of course, as soon as anyone emerges from the courtroom with news of what the judge has had to say, we'll tell you about that. In the meantime, let's bring in Rachel Hill. She's a blogger on women's and social issues, an Australian living in London. Rachel, what are you making of today's developments?
Well, I think what's really significant here is that the concerns have come from the prosecutors themselves. Regularly in sexual assault cases, you see the defence trying to drag the accuser's name through the mud. But in this case, you've got the people who are representing the woman and who are on her team who are questioning her.
And what about the fact that when these accusations were announced, lots of people in the media and in the online social media and so on, very keen to convict Dominique Strauss-Kahn before he'd had a trial, and now it seems the other way around. People are also quite happy to start accepting these allegations made about this maid when really we don't know if any of them are true or not.
Well, exactly. I think that perhaps particularly when it comes to sexual assault cases, our responses to them tend to be less based on the facts, but more based on our predisposition towards the people involved. So in this case, perhaps people had an automatic negative response to Dominique Strauss-Kahn. He seemed like somebody that would be guilty to them based on quite superficial evidence. And now when it turns the other way, perhaps they're feeling a lot of guilt and regret about their initial response.
Rachel, thanks for those comments. And just in case those of you are wondering about the details of the bail which Dominique Strauss-Kahn's lawyers are trying to get relaxed, he's under house arrest in a New York apartment. We've just seen that apartment. He posted $6 million cash bail and bond in May. Armed guards, electronic surveillance are at the scene, and also he wears an electronic ankle monitor. It remains to be seen if any of those terms of his bail will be relaxed. In the meantime, let's bring in Vivienne Norris. She's an American expat, also a French national, and a writer for the Huffington Post. Vivienne, what do you make of today's developments?
I keep thinking about the timing of everything in the media and the way information was released, and also the fact that there are bigger issues taking place here. We're in a very stressful economic situation in the West, and the fact that if we look at the timing of what was happening, just the day before Dominique Strauss-Kahn was arrested, he had made a decision to go ahead and help with the restructuring of the debt in Greece. Now, what I did not understand until recently was that technically meant a default, which meant that all of the credit default swaps, which had been played, just a moment, it's not a conspiracy. People kept saying, oh, in France, they think there's a conspiracy. We have to step back and look at the broader economic issues taking place here. And it's very interesting that the media has just released this information about this woman in New York the day after Christine Lagarde has been confirmed as the new head of the IMF. So there's no going back. The damage has been done.
But everything you're listing is circumstantial. And Gilles Klein, there's been lots of talk online about conspiracies and attempt to stop Dominique Strauss-Kahn running for president. But there's not one bit of evidence that this is anything other than a regular criminal case.
I don't think we should even say conspiracy. I think we should look at the timeline of the facts.
I appreciate it, but Vivian, as I was saying, what you're detailing is circumstantial evidence. Gilles Klein with us from France. There's no actual evidence, is there, beyond circumstance that anyone is interfering with the process of justice here?
No, but I think you still need
Vivian,
to look at...
please, with respect, please let me get Gilles to respond to my questions.
Yes, now in Paris, nobody speaks about any conspiracy, you know. And yes, like the lady we just talked right now, Lagarde a few days ago, I made it, but the French won, whatever, you know, a French after a French. So I think it's not the problem. The problem is there is something wrong in this day when he was in New York, and perhaps the lady, it was not so trustable, but whatever, it's done. Now we wait what's going on, you know, and the French doesn't speak about any conspiracy now. That's finished.
I agree that they don't speak about it in terms of a conspiracy. That's usually what the word other people were using. They didn't necessarily believe that he was guilty of what he was being accused of, at least many, many different French people I spoke to. The thing that's interesting is you're saying that Christine Lagarde taking the place of the IMF is a French replacing a French. It's a very, very different approach. It's not looking at restructuring the Greek debt. This is not, just look at the bigger questions. The other thing I want to say very quickly is that what this did put a finger on in France, especially, is that the Dominique Strauss-Kahn accusation.
Vivian, your voice is coming in and out. Let's see if we can just sort that out so you can complete your point. In the meantime, we're getting calls from Spain, Vietnam, Pakistan, Nigeria, Ghana, Chile, and Canada. Actually, as we want to take a couple of seconds to sort out Vivian's line before letting her continue to talk with Gilles and Rachel. This seems like a good opportunity to take a couple of minutes break. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about Dominique Strauss-Kahn. He is in a Manhattan courtroom at the moment. His lawyers are asking for his bail conditions to be relaxed. As soon as we find out what the judge says about those recommendations, we'll let you know, of course. In the meantime, we're talking about the numerous issues that are being raised by the developments in the story today. Let's pull up a comment from Bob in Queensland, who's got in touch through Facebook. He says, anonymity for the accused sounds logical. However, there are practical issues, especially for celebrities. Even with a news blackout, how could Strauss-Kahn explain to the world why he's stuck in New York City with a transmitter on his ankle? Well, let's put that point to Gilles Klein, who's still with us. We haven't been able to reconnect with Vivian, which is a shame, and we still have Rachel, who's with us in London. To those two, I'll bring in Ali Edzatiar, an American lawyer based in Paris. Maybe, Ali, you could lead us off. Do you think the experience of Dominique Strauss-Kahn makes the case that those accused of rape or attempted rape should be allowed to remain anonymous?
I think it's difficult. I think in a case like this, that's a good point that was made earlier, that, you know, whether or not he was in France or whether or not he was in New York, the fact that he's Dominique Strauss-Kahn makes it difficult for him to stay anonymous. And I think Americans tend to take pride in the fact that no matter who an accused is, whether or not he is, you know, famous or not famous, that he ultimately is subject to public scrutiny like anyone else. I think this doesn't change anything per se. No celebrity is, in a sense, above the law. I think it's a cultural factor for Americans more than anything else. It's very difficult to say if anything would have happened differently in France. There are definitely different issues that arise early on in a proceeding. There's no guilty or not guilty pleading. Prosecutors have a lot more leeway in terms of evidence in France, and anonymity is also much more sort of an issue for those who are accused. But in the past, there have been French celebrities and French politicians that have been brought up on charges of corruption, and it's leaked immediately. So it's very difficult to say whether or not you know, that would be any different in France or in New York.
Rachel, come in here.
Well, I think what I find interesting here is that my first thought is that a lot of the time, allowing the accuser to be anonymous but not allowing the accused to be anonymous actually ends up acting in favour of the accuser. I can think particularly in an Australian context, we've had a lot of accusations against professional footballers for committing sexual assault against women. And what that has tended to mean is that because the public is familiar with the footballer, they see him as being a human being and they see him as somebody who's being unfairly targeted, whereas the woman remains a kind of anonymous harlot who's out to get him. So I think that perhaps keeping high-profile potential offenders anonymous would actually enable both sides to be better heard.
Gilles, where do you stand on this?
Oh, in France right now, after this morning news coming from New York, the French people generally online, on Twitter, on the web, and on the TV show say we have the best system in the world, So they don't speak about the anonymous lady. They just say it's better because we don't have a perp walk and we are not too fast to put the people in jail and so on, And the second issue is there will be a different country before the DSK affair in New York and after, whatever the court says, because the feminist people and all the newspaper, all the media, all the people in the street has been speaking about that. So the main issue will be more that it's a 68, a mai 68 of the ladies. You can talk now, you can act easily when you are in the power area to a lady like you have done it before, You can't joke the same way. There is a DSK between and after.
And if you're watching, I'm curious to know, do you think that what's playing out in the Dominique Strauss-Kahn case makes a case for anonymity, not just for a woman making accusations of sexual assault, but also the man that she is accusing? Do call us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Calls coming in from Spain, Vietnam, Pakistan, Canada, Finland, Israel, Sweden, and the Philippines. Another way you can get onto the show is if you post on Facebook. One of the team will get back to you, will get your number and get you on the phone. That's what we've done with Don. He's a New Yorker on Prince Edward Island in Canada. Don, thanks for getting in touch. What's your response to what's happening?
Well, I don't believe that it's possible for a very famous public person to remain anonymous in something like this. However, in this particular case, I've never seen anything like it in New York ever. I mean, this man would be the equivalent of like Mitt Romney in London, suddenly being hauled before a judge and accused with very little evidence. And then, in fact, the district attorney at the time, Cyrus Vance, he was emphatic about the strength of the case and the account of the victim, and he went on record. He gave a news conference.
Don, let me just interrupt you here. There's a couple of things worth picking up on. In terms of the strength of the evidence, clearly no one's really in a position to judge because we haven't seen it, but the prosecution did say they had strong evidence to back up their claims. But let's put your concerns to our three guests, to Gilles, to Ali and to Rachel. Ali, maybe you could go first. Do you have worries that Dominique Strauss-Kahn was judged in the court of public opinion and that those accusations will stick to him whether he's charged, whether he's found guilty or not guilty?
It's too early to say, obviously, but I think let's realize one thing. The press has had months now to dig up evidence on the individual, the accuser, and they have essentially failed. If you were reading the New York Times and reading any sort of biographies that existed on her before, they were basically glowing. And it was the prosecution itself that uncovered most of the details that could eventually, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, but that could lead to, dismissal of charges. So you have to take the system in its totality. The American system prides itself, of course, on the openness and also the fact that the prosecution has not only, the responsibility of putting someone behind bars, but also uncovering the evidence, whatever it may be. The downsides to it may be in a case like this where you have, an individual like Dominique Strauss-Kahn who does the quote-unquote perp walk, and that's something that's seen by the public, but by no means is that a means by which to judge a legal system. I think that would be foolhardy, essentially, to
and
go that far.
As you're talking, Ali, we can see older pictures of Dominique Strauss-Kahn in his previous job as head of the IMF. Before that, we saw live pictures, not much happening outside that courtroom in Manhattan. And as soon as something is happening, of course, we'll bring that to you here on BBC World News. But Gilles, I could see you, the viewers couldn't. I could see you nodding your head as Ali was speaking. What's your view of how Dominique Strauss-Kahn's been dealt with by the media?
Oh no, I don't feel it, you know. Regarding the French public opinion, he would be a martyr, you know. He comes from the martyrdom, so they will forgive everything he had. But personally, yes, it's a big miss for him because he left in a hazardous condition the IMF, and also he's not running for the presidential right now. But his personality, his reputation, you know, is going up today.
So that's interesting.
You know?
You say there are short-term things which can't be changed, where he is definitely lost out, but in the long term, his reputation may be okay if, and of course it's if, he is found not guilty. And it is worth reiterating that despite these reports in the New York Times saying the prosecution has doubts about the reliability of the key witness in this case, Dominique Strauss-Kahn remains charged with 7 different offences. Rachel, what's your view of the media coverage? Should Dominique Strauss-Kahn have been given more even-handed treatment?
Well, I think the thing that's striking me at the moment is something that I just saw up on Twitter before, where somebody was saying that even it's absolutely true that if Dominique Strauss-Kahn turns out to not be guilty of these charges, and that's an absolutely terrible thing, the way in which that may have impacted his career. But it's also important to balance this out by remembering that in the vast majority of cases where people accuse others of sexual assault, they're not making it up.
Rachel, thanks for those comments for the moment. OK, let's cross to Bush House, the home of the BBC World Service, where Mahfouz is with the World Have Your Say team, who are busy answering all of your calls. Mahfouz, what have you got for us?
Just in the last few minutes, there have been calls from Spain, Vietnam, Finland, Ghana. Quite a few of you are saying that you think Mr Strauss-Kahn is actually innocent. Some of you are saying that this entire episode was political. Edward in St. Petersburg, Russia, called in. He says, I felt from the very start that he was innocent. He held his head up in court. There's another view, though. Vuglog got in touch on Twitter. In sexual assault cases, the identity of the accused should also be withheld. A false accusation can ruin a person's life. And as always, you can join the conversation right now using the hashtag that you see on the screen, WHYS.
Thank you very much indeed, Mahfouz. I'm curious that some of you are saying he's innocent or guilty. I'm confused as to how you could possibly know that, but thank you very much indeed for calling us up. Let's go back to Ali. Do you feel uncomfortable, Ali, that in France there's clearly a lot of political discussions going on about what role Dominique Strauss-Kahn should play in the presidency and the presidential election next year? Is it far too early for that?
I think clearly it's far too early. I think taking a step back, the manner in which this is being viewed by the French press is very interesting. I agree with Gilles that in a sense it looks like he's being cleansed of his sins already, and if he were to have charges dismissed based on the veracity of the prosecution's witness, that wouldn't necessarily change the fact that an individual with the history of Dominique Strauss-Kahn doesn't make a great politician. There are individuals who have come up in France in the meantime that he's been in jail, accusing him of essentially attempted sexual assault. So I think it's a huge issue. You know, in the U.S. system, it's generally, yes?
I was just going to jump in to mention, because it's worth mentioning just before we wrap up this half hour of World Have Your Say, there's a poll running on the Figaro newspaper's website saying that 59% of people don't want Dominique Strauss. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, by a long way, there's only one issue that you're all talking about. Dominique Strauss-Kahn is in a Manhattan courtroom as I talk to you. Those are the pictures from one camera feed we've got. Let's have a look at the other camera feed that we've got as well. Lots of cameramen, as you'd expect, people waiting for lawyers to emerge or Dominique Strauss-Kahn to emerge. What's at stake is the bail conditions under which Dominique Strauss-Kahn is living at the moment. They're very stringent. They involve $6 million in bail money and in a bond. He has a tag on his ankle. He's under electronic surveillance, any number of strict rules that come with the bail. His lawyers are saying it's time to relax those rules, and the basis on which they're saying that is that there is new evidence to suggest that he is not as much of a threat as was possibly thought. So that's what's happening, but we don't know what the judge is going to say. We're waiting to hear from him. As soon as we do, of course, we'll bring it to you here on BBC World News. In the meantime, we can get stuck into all of the issues that have been thrown up by that New York Times article, quoting people from the prosecution saying they have doubts about the reliability of the key witness. We've been talking about anonymity, whether men accused of sexual assault should be granted it. We've been talking about the US justice system, and we've been talking about the French presidential election next year. We'll get into all of those issues here on World Have Your Say, and wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part. And of course, we'll be speaking to some of you in France and in America, as well as others around the world. But first of all, let's catch up on the Dominique Strauss-Kahn story and all of the day's other main news. Now, Dominique Strauss-Kahn is in a New York court. I've already told you that. This is as doubts have emerged regarding his case. The former IMF chief is accused of attempted rape by a hotel chambermaid. Now, 2 investigators working for the prosecution have told the New York Times that the maid's credibility has been called into question by alleged links to a convicted drug dealer. It's the 90th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, and President Hu Jintao has warned its members that they must fight corruption to retain the support and trust of the people. Crowds of protesters have again taken to the streets in Syria to demand President Assad's resignation. This video apparently shows a large protest in the Al-Qadam neighborhood in Damascus, but the BBC cannot independently verify this. A number of people are reported to have been killed. Lebanon's Interior Minister has confirmed the names of 4 Hezbollah members charged with the murder of the country's former Prime Minister Rafi Hariri. The arrest warrants were issued by a UN-backed tribunal investigating the murder. And Novak Djokovic is through to the Wimbledon men's final. It was quite a game. Watch the highlights if you can. He beat Jo-Wilfried Tsonga 7-6, 6-2, 6-7, 6-3. He'll either play Andy Murray or Rafael Nadal. They are just beginning their semi-final match now. Let me introduce you to our first 3 guests. In London, we have Rachel Hills, a blogger on women's and social issues. She's an Australian living in London. We're also joined by Kate, a mother of 5, who's got in touch with us from Ireland. And Tim Crook is a senior lecturer in media law and ethics at the University of London, and he's live from a BBC studio in the east of England. Tim, let me start with you. Explain to us, if you can, the procedure that is happening in this Manhattan courtroom at the moment.
Well, this is an application to change the conditions of bail. I mean, it's a key part of a prosecution process, which in the United States, because of its open justice tradition, has maximum media reporting. In fact, the American media, if they wanted to, could identify all the parties because of an ethical tradition on the part of mainstream US media and in New York City. The complainant is not being identified. So it's an urgent critical position for a globalized international figure. Now, our access to the information varies according to where you are and who decides to report what. For example, if you wanted to know the identity of the complainant, you can go on the internet and find out. She was initially identified by the French media and continental media, which ironically was arising from countries where there is statutory constitutional privacy for complainants of criminal offences, particularly women complainants of sexual offences.
And just so we're clear, if the judge, and it's if at the moment, if the judge were to relax the bail conditions, what would that be a consequence of? What would he have decided that the prosecution had successfully argued?
Well, I presume we'd find out if it is an open court hearing, which I'm sure it is. There will be arguments being presented by the defence attorney that previous arguments advanced by the state attorney that these restrictions should be applied because there was a risk that he would not remain in US jurisdiction to participate and take part in the criminal process. I mean, that's the key argument. The relaxation of bail conditions depends on successful arguments from the defense attorney, but there may well be, according to the New York Times newspaper report, there may well be information being provided out of obligation, legal obligation, from the state attorney that supports the defense attorney's application.
Tim, we appreciate you explaining that to us. Do stay with us. And by the way, if you're emailing us, post it at worldhaveyoursay.com or at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. Many of your comments will appear up on the screen as our conversation goes along. Now let's bring in Kate. She's on the phone from Ireland. She did run as an independent in the last general election in Ireland, but she's asked to be described as a mum of 5. Kate, what issue would you like to raise with regards to today's developments?
Well, there just seems to be trial by media regarding both sides, in fact, because the victim or the witness seems to also be on trial at this point. But there was far too much information released on the arrest of Dominique Strauss-Kahn. And when someone is allegedly a philandering, a lecherous philanderer, allegedly, there's quite a distinction between that and an accusation of a violent sex crime. And I think that distinction wasn't drawn. There were allegations about past
Well, let's pick up on this. This is an issue lots of our viewers are raising. And as you're talking, we can see another camera angle of the courthouse. It gives you an idea of the amount of media that is there. But the question is, did the media handle this case properly from the off? Let's bring in Gilles Klein, a French media journalist. Gilles, once the accusations emerged, more accusations appeared in the French press. Now, we don't need to get into the details of those accusations, but was the French press too quick to start wheeling out anyone who wanted to do down Dominique Strauss-Kahn?
No, my feeling about this issue is you're famous like he is. You have to accept to have the media to check what you're doing. But I like the English systems which make the accusator, this young lady, not named. The French people started as soon as possible to have her name, and they were looking for the photo, and I'm sorry for that. I'm thinking when you're running for international companies, international organization, when you're running for presidency, like he is doing, you have to accept every kind of privacy away if you're in trouble with justice, innocent or guilty, So I think the French people made their case in the media with the normal way. The only thing I didn't like is the way we were trying to do a court story against the American courts, saying the French way is better than American way. And I think it was wrong, because now...
Gilles, I'm going to interrupt you because as people will be able to see on their screen, we do have breaking news now that prosecutors agree to lift the Strauss-Kahn bail. We'll get more details of that in a moment. But Gilles, your immediate reaction to that?
Oh, I think it's quite normal. I see it from the French journalist in the courtroom on my Twitter line, on my screen and under my Skype stuff, and I think it's quite normal. But the story is not closed. It's the first step. Does he have his passport? Can he travel? Whatever. No answer about that.
Well, it's true. We don't know whether he'll be able to leave the United States, whether he'll be able to leave New York. In fact, Tim Crook from the University of London, your reaction to that as well?
Well, it appears to be burying up the content of the New York Times report and the briefings that have been going on. I'm very interested in the comments from your other guests. What we are seeing, of course, is a clash of cultures across the world. The American system is much more open. There's the First Amendment. They deal with media prejudice by examining a potential jury very, very closely. If Mr Strauss-Kahn was being dealt with in London, we would all be prosecuted for contempt of court because of a much stricter, more censorial approach. And in relation to the identity of accuser and defendant, the situation is very different in the USA. Yet, voluntarily, the mainstream media exercise ethical responsibility. In this country, the identification of the complainant would lead to a criminal prosecution and probable imprisonment, certainly a heavy fine.
And we're getting more information bit by bit from the courtroom. First of all, it's worth reiterating, the prosecution has agreed to relaxing the terms of Dominique Strauss-Kahn's bail. The judge in the case says, and I quote, "The case is not over." So that is a statement of the obvious, but still important to reiterate. Gilles, you were reacting to that.
Well, my
point.
I
think we have to wait, you know. I understand we are live, and the French TV is live. I see it on two other screens, but without the sound. And that's clear, we have to wait, you know. We have to wait. The issue is not done, and in the American justice, he's not out, you know. He has to stay in New York, and there is a follow-up. Whatever the credibility of the accuser is in question, whatever. There was something in this room, and I think the American justice want to know it, and the media people in the world want to know it, and the few people in the world which take care about this big issue about a big man, they want to know how he is treated, and he is guilty or not, you know. We don't have any answer.
A couple of other pieces of information, just to reiterate if you're turning on your televisions. Bail has been relaxed for Dominique Strauss-Kahn. There he is, live pictures coming out of the courtroom. The judge says that the case isn't over. The feed there is frozen. I'm absolutely certain that will be sorted out. There you go. Let's see if we can get a better view of him there. He's accompanied by his wife, who's been living with him in that Manhattan apartment, and they're getting straight into their car, so we're not going to hear from them. It's worth reiterating the judge has said the case isn't over. We don't know exactly how, in what ways bail has been relaxed. The next hearing in this case will be on the 18th of July, and prosecutors have reiterated that they are not abandoning the case despite agreeing to the relaxation of terms of Dominique Strauss-Kahn's bail. Those pictures live from Manhattan. We don't have details of where Dominique Strauss-Kahn is going. According to his previous bail terms, he'd be going straight back to that apartment. But until we find out the new terms of the bail, we can't be sure exactly where he's going now. Now, let's remind you, if you want to react to this, you can tweet using the hashtag DSK or the hashtag WHYS. We'll pick up tweets using both of those hashtags. Tim Crook from the University of London, is it unusual that we still don't have details of the new bail rules, the new bail regulations?
Well, it depends on the nature of the hearing and how information is being released. Some hearings in the States are televised, particularly in the state system. Other hearings are not televised, particularly in the federal system. These interlocutory preliminary processes sometimes held in private. For example, grand jury hearings are normally always in secret. But I'm sure the information will eventually emerge. It does sound like the defence attorneys and the prosecuting attorneys have come to some kind of agreement, and therefore the judge wouldn't really have any choice but to agree with the position. But it's absolutely clear the criminal process continues. There may well be a trial in the future. And I personally, unlike a lot of my fellow British media professors and a lot of the British judiciary, I have a lot of respect for the American system. Although it's open and might appear brash, the openness guarantees, in my opinion, any potential support for the credibility of criminal complaints, and in the end will support any actual innocence for defendants.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. Just before we take a break, let's reiterate the main points of this breaking news. The terms of Dominique Strauss-Kahn's bail have been relaxed. We don't know what the new terms are. He's left the Manhattan courtroom where he appeared a few minutes ago. He'll be expected to attend a hearing on the 18th of July. The judge has said the case isn't closed, and prosecutors have said they have not given up pursuing the charges. And with those headlines, we'll take a break for a couple of minutes and keep on talking about it when we come back. Dominique Strauss-Kahn's bail terms have been relaxed in the past few minutes. Let's hear from his lawyer who's speaking outside the courtroom.
We believed from the beginning that this case was not what it appeared to be, and we are absolutely convinced that while today is a first giant step, in the right direction, the next step will lead to a complete dismissal of the charges. And on a sort of a personal observation, I think it's kind of appropriate that on the eve of Independence Day, we get to celebrate for Strauss-Kahn, Mr. Strauss-Kahn and his family, a bit of his personal independence. So thank you very much.
Mr. Strauss-Kahn is going back to Washington. What is happening now?
I think right now we're going to meet with Mr. Strauss-Kahn and his family. We are going to confer about what the next step is. We will continue to meet with the district attorney's office, and we will either see you again on the 18th, if not before. Thank you very much.
In New York, Mr. Bradford.
He does not have to remain in New York. He's free to travel anywhere in the United States. He just isn't permitted to leave the country until the case is resolved.
You gotta leave the country.
Thank you very much.
That he's gone, but right at the end there he answered one question I know a lot of you have been asking, whether Dominique Strauss-Kahn can leave America. The answer is no. We know that the judge has said that his travel documents will be retained, but judging by what Dominique Strauss-Kahn's lawyer was saying there, he will be free to travel within the United States. Well, let's go from New York straight to Paris and speak to the BBC's Christian Fraser. Christian, early reaction to the news?
Well, Lionel Jospin said early this morning that this was a thunderbolt, not just for Dominique Strauss-Kahn, but also for the party itself and for the political future here in France, because, of course, he was a leading candidate for the presidential election. Whether or not he becomes a candidate or a kingmaker, he could very much change the picture of events over the course of the next 10 months. So we're looking at the papers for tomorrow. Already we've got Le Monde, high drama in the DSK affair, but it's this bit here that should interest us. Leading socialists who threw their lot in with other candidates who've already declared for next year are now having a rethink about a political future for Dominique Strauss-Kahn. It seems unbelievable, doesn't it, that 2 weeks ago...
Let me interrupt you. I apologise, but we're now hearing from a lawyer representing the woman making the accusations.
And she has never once changed a single thing about that account. The DA knows that. That was true the day it happened. It is true today. What they did not tell you upstairs in the courtroom today is that the victim herself is the one who came forward voluntarily with the information about her asylum application. She told me that she wanted to tell the district attorney the truth about how she first came to this country and about other matters. I then called the lead prosecutor and told her that the victim wanted to tell you everything, that she was afraid. I told the district attorney's office exactly what the victim told me. And the victim then met with the district attorney alone and described some of the things that she had not told them. Now, this is important. The only defense that Dominique Strauss-Kahn has is that this sexual encounter was consensual. That is a lie.